wow, look at this guy out here in his Ferrari and you're too cheap to drive your S2000. Welcome back, I'm Tedward. Welcome to my 2023 Honda Civic Type R and welcome to a cold and salty New England. It's winter and today I want to talk about what I'm calling the daily driver paradox, because according to the internet, when I drive a Honda Civic Type R as my daily driver in the winter, I'm ruining it. Yet, a man driving a 911 GT3 Touring or a Ferrari GTC4 Lusso all winter is a legend. And it's really wild to me that for whatever reason, driving a car that I can afford to drive in the winter, pardon all of the traffic, I've chosen a terrible location, I am a monster for ruining this perfectly special, bespoke Honda that can't be replaced. It can be replaced. It would be a little troublesome. But someone driving their one-off PTS paint-colored 911 all winter long, drifting in the salt, not caring what happens to it, getting it dirty. Oh boy, that guy is just living the dream and driving dirty. And of course, we don't want this to happen to our vehicle. We've got a rusty 1500 Suburban next to us with a lot of brown underneath. And that is a pile of corrosive road salt that every single car in this lot is seeing the trauma from. So why is it that none of this is okay, but driving a Ferrari is? Let's jump in and have a chat. You can tell I'm getting older because I have a bottle of ibuprofen in my cup holder permanently. $2,100 miles on the Type R already. Oh boy. So the reason I bring this up in the first place is because the internet is a weird place full of hypocrisy and contradiction, says the man talking to you from the internet. There's a problem here because I keep seeing these memes where they'll show somebody in a really expensive super or hyper car driving through some ugly winter conditions. And then the comment is always the same. It's like, well, you put your WRX away for the winter, and what's your excuse? This guy's out here in a Zonda. Well, I think the math is pretty simple, guys. If you have enough money for multi-million-dollar cars, or even just, a simple, humble $500,000 car, you can probably afford to drive it in the winter. You can probably afford to have it be disposable. And I really don't understand why people are then going to be completely oblivious to the fact that somebody with a WRX that maybe they've put some money and time into, they've tuned it, they've got their suspension set up just right, they've dialed in the paint, they've got all their modifications, it's lowered and all these things. Maybe that person has really put a substantial amount of their financial abilities and energy into that vehicle and just doesn't want to risk allowing it to corrode in the snow. So it's odd though, because then I'll be driving my Civic Type R and I'll get comments all the time like, why are you driving this in the winter? Why would you allow this to see these conditions, to get any kind of briny, salty water on that chassis? What is wrong with you? Buy yourself a beater. And buy yourself a beater is coming from the exact same people who are calling the Ferrari and GT3 drivers legends and making fun of those of us who are putting other cars away for the winter. We're constantly in this battle between garage queens being lame and, oh, how dare you own these cars and not just use them in every possible scenario? Why are you off-roading your Ferrari like a real man? And the other side of it, which is, why are you ruining this great car? You should be ashamed of yourself for driving in it. And it's very strange because it's coming from the same people. So step one is pretty simple. Mind your business. If somebody buys a Ferrari 458 Speciale and decides to drive it in the winter, let them. If they decide to put it in a collection next to their other 40 Ferraris, let them. It's their choice. It's their car. And it's interesting because if they do preserve the Ferrari, if they do preserve this car, for whatever reason, they're lambasted by it during their ownership. Yet, in 20 years, in 30 years, when that car has 100 miles on it and it's going at auction for, millions of dollars, everyone's going to say, wow, somebody preserved it. So thankful that this car exists in this condition because everyone else beat the crap out of them. The same goes for some odd, crummy cars. I've driven really low mileage Ford Escorts from 1992. I think that's really cool because they've essentially all rusted out and become complete, just pieces of trash. Everyone always slows down here because there's almost always a cop sitting right here. That guy's just programmed for it. Too funny. And I've also been at car dealerships when someone rolls in a 50,000 mile Aston Martin Vantage and it's beats a heck and they're making fun of it because they're like, oh my God, this person just had no respect for this car, except that it's probably just normal wear and tear for an Aston Martin with 50,000 miles. So I'm always just confounded by which side of the argument are you arguing? Why are you even arguing? It's not your car. Who cares what they do with it? And I fall on a kind of both sides of the spectrum because I have 3 cars. 2 of my cars sit in storage over the winter. My 1988 911 Carrera and my 2001 BMW M5 are not going to be seeing salty winter weather because of 2 reasons. Number 1, I am not a huge fan of entropy. The world is chaos. It is falling apart. Unfortunately, that's not just nihilism. That's just nature. The universe is cooling and cars will rust. That's just the way it is. And I would like for those cars to be preserved as long as possible and to not have to be in a position where A, I've lost a ton of money because I've rotted out the frame of my 911, or I can't drive it because I've rotted out the frame of my 911. So they've never seen winter and they sit in storage over that time, except I do need a car to drive. And while I love and respect this Honda Civic Type R, wow, what a misspeak. This Honda Civic Type R is fantastic. I love it to pieces. It's a phenomenal vehicle to drive. It is a Civic. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I'm just saying, while it's not a cheap car at about $45,000, $46,000, it is a safe, reliable piece of transportation that brings me joy to drive. And if all the haters saying, well, what are you doing? Buy a beater. Well, if you buy a beater, it means you're getting another headache. You're buying a $5,000 or $10,000 Accord or another Civic or something that's going to have 100,000 miles on it. It's going to leak oil everywhere. It's going to need work. It's going to be a headache to maintain. And not to mention the fact that it'll probably be, 10 or 15 years old. It's going to be less safe. So I do want to be driving I want to be hedging my bets when it comes to safety because people drive like absolute maniacs. They're on their phones all the time. They're not paying attention and cars are getting heavier. There's a 10,000 pound Hummer EV on the market right now. I do not want to get hit in a 10,000 pound Hummer EV in my beater Miata. I will not survive the accident. Now I do think, as we get off the highway, that there is a healthy middle ground because I had a 2010 E92 M3 for quite a few years, about 6 years, and I absolutely loved that car. But I did use it in pretty much every possible scenario, whether it was for the good of its longevity, which was all the maintenance and stuff I did, or things that I just said, screw it, I own this car, I want to experience it in every way, which was me going to a rally cross in the winter. Big mistake, and I really should have not done that because basically it wasn't on a nice smooth surface. I'm drifting this car sideways on these horrible rutted fields. It ended up kind of busting up a bunch of suspension bushings, and it caused a headache for me because now I was in this position where man, do I really need to go and do a full suspension refresh on this M3 because I'm hearing some knocking and stuff from the rear end, annoying stuff like that. And I do think there's a healthy middle ground between using your car, accepting that it's going to degrade in certain ways, but also maintaining it and treating it with enough respect that you're not just destroying it and ruining the car for yourself. My friend Will Lee, PTSRS, has a 981 Porsche Cayman S. It's beautiful. It's like this sort of brown, maybe I think it's called anthracite metallic. I don't remember. I'm not the color guy. He's the color guy. You probably know the car better than I do. But he lives in New York, in the city, and he has to accept this certain level of destruction that's going to happen to his vehicle because it's getting valet parked in the garages. Now, it's not because it's a fancy bougie place. It's just that when you go to a parking garage in Manhattan or wherever, you don't get to park your car. Someone parks it for you. They put it in an elevator, they go up a couple floors, and you never really know how tight that car is parked, except that you do, because when they come out, every time you want to drive your car, you might find a new little scratch on the bumper, on the side, on wherever it's going to be. And there is a bit of entropy that you need to accept and factor in to your ownership. And we can always respect street parked cars in New York. That's a whole culture. Looking at street parked cars in Manhattan is like a whole car spotting enterprise. It's fantastic to see, like, wow, I can't believe someone's parking this 1960s Ferrari in Manhattan on the street. That's very cool. And yes, it is cool. That guy is a legend. Except that you can't look at that legend and then crap on somebody like me driving a Honda Civic Type R and saying, this moron's parking it in the street and ruining it. Which is it? So that to me is this sort of daily driver paradox. You could get a beater for your daily driver, and then you could get a beater for your beater because your beater's too nice. And at that point, you're just driving nothing and you're going to die in any minor car accident because your beater's probably a piece of trash. Or you're just putting so much money into your beaters to keep them running that you don't actually have any money or time to enjoy the car that you bought the beater for. And while I absolutely love when I see somebody driving a GT3 in the winter, getting it dirty, having some fun, I also have to understand that those cars are often a little more disposable for those people at that income level. So it's really not fair to say, wow, look at this guy out here in his Ferrari and you're too cheap to drive your S2000. It's like, well, that S2000 might be a significant chunk of the money you've ever made in your lifetime. And that GT3 might just be a car that he owns for 2 years, barely gets to the point where the miles rack up to an expired warranty, and he's on to the next one. Not a fair assessment of your friends who are preserving their babies. Leave them alone. So that's all I got. I think there's a healthy middle ground between preserving some of the cars that are really special to you that you can, afford to buy but can't afford to destroy. I can't really afford to destroy my 911. I need that car to be special. I'm not going to take it off-roading. I'm not going to put winter tires on it and expose it to corrosive road salt. I can, however, kind of afford to play that game with a more modern car with better construction, with more protection against corrosion, and just keep it clean. I'm bringing it to craft detailing. I'm using certain applications to make sure that it's not going to rust out. But I also can't live this life where this Honda is my garage queen. But I also can't live a life where I'm just going to go and jump it like Whistling Diesel off a cliff to see what happens. So I don't know if this is something that you've been seeing on the internet in your daily life or just in the comment sections. I feel like everybody who goes onto Instagram or YouTube, especially TikTok, man, they're out for blood. They're out for blood. What is the problem? Why open your phone if you're just there to be angry at whoever is creating something? Just let it go. Let them drift their cars in the snow. Let them keep them in the garage. Let them do whatever they want. Thank you guys so much for watching, liking, commenting, and subscribing. Don't forget to respect the drive, and I'll see you in the next one. Of course I believe that cars are meant to be driven. There's no point in owning cars that you just don't use, but I also understand that some people, they bite off a little more than they can chew. So you may be able to afford that $100,000 car. Wow, that's a big deal. But you may not be able to afford to go put 60,000 miles on it in 3 years. And you buy a 997.2 GT3. I fully understand that maybe that's a weekend car. Maybe that's a car that you're allotting 5,000 or 10,000 miles to every couple of years. Keep things flowing, enjoy the thing, but also not putting yourself in a place where you have to have some outrageously expensive maintenance schedule.